I couldn't close today's event without inviting my co-investigators, Anna Rowlands and Alastair Ager, to also share their thoughts with us on the event and how it ties into the themes that we've been exploring through Refugee Hosts. They will both be presenting and speaking tomorrow, so we look forward to continuing the conversations.
I've got 5 things that have been kind of going around my head, and I think one of the things that's really struck me from the very beginning of today, listening to Homi's keynote, actually, which I was doing on the train on the way from Durham, is we set out at the beginning of this research project with a sense that there were 4 of us and then a wider group of researchers who had some instincts in common, but we didn't start out with a set of theories that we all subscribed to or a set of texts that we all would have said were our key texts. And yet what's emerged is a really extraordinary sense of echoing themes, I think, as the project's gone on, and that's really struck me heavily today. So that will be obvious in the very quick 5 things that I will mention. So the first thing that I think is a kind of resonant theme for us going through the day, and also has become a key feature of Refugee Hosts, is this commitment to deep studies of place. So to trying not to deny spatialities and the importance of thinking about space, which for a long time has been important in particular kinds of philosophy and social theory, but rather to place again as something vastly important. I work not just on this project, but also on issues around Brexit in the UK, and also on refugee hosting and asylum policy in a UK context. And the notion that we shouldn't be returning to deep studies of place across those contexts. So again, a non-exceptionalist account of why we need to turn to deep studies of place. And we've seen that talking about intimacy and hiddenness. We've seen it in that reflection on singularities, and particularly in Yusuf's poetry and the drawing out of the importance of handling singularities. The second theme for me, and sorry, just to say as well, and in its institutional forms as well, so not wanting to turn that into some kind of ethical individualism or simply in between the person. The second theme for me that's really important to our work and is echoed through the day is about time and temporalities. We've all in different ways been working on, again, this return to thinking philosophically, theologically, social scientifically about time and temporality, about time as interrupted, about time as ruptured, but also about continuities in time as well, about traditions and how traditions themselves are subject to and formed through movement. So that return to time and the way in which time is something not just that we reflect on as academics, but time as it is being taken up in the arenas of policy and politics by the market. This is one of the reasons why we have to return to thinking about time and temporality. Thirdly, tactility and the embodied life. I loved and then struggled with in different ways. I have also a slight reservation about the bare life construct of Agamben, although obviously there are other things that are of interest there to me as well. But the suggestion of burdened life rather than bare life, and the trying to struggle, I'm not sure burdened life is quite the right phrase for me, but struggling with a phrase that takes on the fullness and the complexity of that space. I thought that then touching on the themes of tactility and embodiedness that have run through the day was really profound and thought-provoking for me. And then finally, 4 and 5. I've been thinking all day, and have to be careful about how I frame this, because I'm a theologian, and the danger is you think other people inhabit your thought world, and then it turns out, annoyingly, they don't. So one of the themes that's really been going through my head all day is the return of the negative. And by the negative, I don't mean the bad. I mean unknowing. I mean limit. And I think we've kept coming back to what we can't know, the connections that we don't yet understand. And I felt that we were figuring in different ways, starting off with Homi's talk this morning and very much through the first stage of the afternoon and maybe the latter as well, this sense of what do we do with what we do not know, with unknowing. And that does not, I think, push us into silence or reification, but rather it pushes us back into the historical and the agentic. So where we're pushed back to in the face of a negative political theory, which is, I think, almost what we were beginning to play with earlier today is the deeply historical and the embodied. So there's something for me about refugee hosts operating around the edges of a negative, an apophatic political theory, which has strong philosophical and theological resonances as well. And then finally, trying to find a space to think about refugee hosting, about hospitality, etc., beyond innocence. So how do we end up with a non-innocent rendering? And we've heard that so powerfully in terms of thinking about ourselves as researchers and the challenge of what it means to be researchers. So we have to have a non-innocent, and by non-innocent, I mean that we don't cede the territory, that we use the terms hospitality and solidarity, that we think about our challenge as researchers without ceding that territory and disappearing, but rather we need to find non-innocent renderings of hospitality, solidarity, and research. So those are just 5 things that struck me listening through the day.
Thank you. There have been many words. I don't want to add many to them. I just want to build a little bit on something Alison was saying 5 minutes ago in response to this question about study of and response to. That's the dilemma I feel. I have a foot, like many of us, in both camps. I'm an academician. I'm a researcher. I enjoy ideas and wrestling with them. But I am at heart also an activist, and I advise government on humanitarian response, and I need to look at the effectiveness of programs. And Elena promised us, encouraged us to wrestle with uncomfortableness, to embrace uncomfortable. And I have to say, I feel quite uncomfortable now. It has not been for me an easy day with those two perspectives. It has been glorious at times to reflect on poetic metaphors and social theory, and struggle then to bring that to the camp, to the suffering, to the tears, to the hunger. But equally, it's been hard to think of how, in practice, we can shape better the imagination of the work, of our understanding of humanitarianism, a plausible political activist engagement with the world that our academic selves or academic colleagues are opening up for us. I don't expect that discomfort between those two agendas will be resolved by, I think, 6:30 tomorrow afternoon. I hope in some way on the journey there, I feel some resolution of that conflict, but I suspect it's not a conflict we want to resolve. I suspect, as Elaine said, it's a conflict we want to embrace, to be creative and to be imaginative. But as I was thinking just 3 minutes ago, what really, in honesty, is the root for my confidence of wrestling with those agendas of study of and response to? It's frankly experience with. I was thinking, Rana, of the young colleagues that you've introduced us to in Jordan, with ambition and with ideals and enthusiasm, learning research methods, authenticity in their engagement. But closer to home, in Edinburgh, the experience of my wife making curtains for the Kurdish family that she received as a host, we might call it, 2 years ago, but is now a friend. And I see in the tears of my wife when that friend asks her to pray for her because of the suffering on the border at this time. Now, that experience of does not resolve those tensions, but it gives me a sense of the humanity that as a scientist and as a humanitarian, I need to bring into that resolution. And I hope you join with us on that journey. Thank you.